Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Daily Energy Markets podcast. It is June the 19th, and we have Brent crude oil once again, in a way. I say once again because it is little changed after the big jump of the sort of Friday and maybe earlier this week, but ultimately has kind of little changed at now 76.89, up a 0.25% this morning, and essentially been plus or minus around that 76 handle since after the first initial shocks, but still a somewhat upward momentum. But ultimately, despite all the massive headlines in the background, the market isn't biting, I suppose. Is that a right way to put it? Isn't biting. Let's kick off this morning close to home here. Omar El Abeidly, Director of Research at the Bahrain Center for Strategic International and Energy Studies. Omar, your assessment of Iran's war, or Israel's war on Iran, I should say, and the possibility of the US, it seems the noise is building to join it this weekend.
Yeah, well, I looked at the poly markets last night to see what the latest assessment from the markets is on the likelihood, and it's, I think, around 60 to 70% of an US being involved before the end of July, and it's up to almost over 80% for its involvement before the end of August. And as you say, the language coming out of the White House seems to be indicating that. However, in the report you shared this morning that you just had on the screen, we had Chinese President Xi Jinping also calling for de-escalation and offering mediation. And we've also had some de-escalatory talk from Putin. So I think it's not a foregone conclusion that the US will be involved yet. However, as you say, everything points in that direction for now. Also, I was reading an interesting analysis this morning about the doubt in President Trump's mind springs from the significant uncertainty over the effectiveness of the potential munitions that the US would use. In particular, he's only interested in taking the US into the war if there is a very high likelihood of the bunker buster bombs taking out the Fordow nuclear installation totally. And based on the advice given to him by his generals, in this unprecedented situation, no such guarantees can be given. And that's what's leading him to potentially delay the decision and still consider not taking it. But for the time being, the drums of war are beating very loudly.
Drums of war are beating, certainly are, but not into the oil markets. Bora Barryman, managing partner at Hormuz Straits Partnership. The UK cabinet, you're sitting in London, of course, with a bird's eye view of 10 Downing Street, I know. But the Prime Minister of the UK has put his cabinet on some kind of like special footing, warning that US could join this war. Your thoughts on that as a political indicator from the UK government, and what impact you think it could have on the oil markets that haven't been really shook by much beyond the initial strike last Friday when we had the big jump, but since then nothing has really shifted the market to another higher level?
Well, on the impact on oil markets, I would say we have seen the serious impact on tanker charter rates, haven't we? But there seems to be plenty of oil in the world, so the pinch will be in the logistics and optimizing, arranging the supply from the glut in many parts of the world. They would be happy to compensate for any shortfall in exports from the Gulf. So the tanker owners are happy. When it comes to the UK, clearly they understand they're not the masters of their own destiny, and they're happy with that. They have strapped themselves in to go along for the ride with wherever Donald Trump would like to drive them. And that's the clear message from the Keir Starmer cabinet. And there will be
Seems for all of
no
Europe,
change
it's sort of a quiet, in essence, a quiet concession, complicity in a way, given the military support it already gives Israel on multiple fronts, been complicit and silent on Gaza massacres, and now similarly in
Yes.
Iran.
It's just a fact of the dynamics of the politics, possibly across Europe, but especially in Germany and the UK, where there's nowhere for the public to turn to. The public is not supportive of involvement in these wars. However, there's no party that the public can turn to um, reflect their opinion and take action along the lines of what they would like to see. We understand here in the UK that a lot of Israeli air bases, airports are not being, let's say, optimally free for operations, and a lot of the air assets of the US and Israel have shifted to the UK bases on Cyprus, and hence, UK sovereign territory becomes potentially a target for any type of retribution from Iran. So the public is aware of this threat, but there's nowhere to turn to in terms of reflecting public opinion and changing policy.
Victor Yang, senior analyst at JLC Network Technology in China, one of the leading China energy analytics firms. Victor, your thoughts on the impact so far? The oil market's pretty tame reaction. China's been pretty silent. We had the statement by the president yesterday, the Chinese president, but ultimately no real impact yet into the energy markets. Why do you think that is?
Well, first, China is not short crude at the moment. And as some analysts have said earlier this week, China continued to build up crude stockpiles this year. And now the run rates are low, particularly among independent refineries. And even in early June, we saw a new low refinery operating rate among independents in 5 years. And for state-owned refiners, the operating rate is also down from a year ago because of peak refinery maintenance. And now we do not see a surge in the buying the spot market yet in China. But I do see a surge in the trading of crude futures in China's Shanghai future stock market last Friday and this Monday. But later on, they flattened out, so there was not much significant impact yet here. And the concern will be how long this conflict can last, and the impact might be
concern how long it could last. What can China do? What is China, do you think, willing to do? We had the statement from the president yesterday to try and contain this crisis, to try and close it in. Asia and China have been pretty quiet, sort of leaving it to the West to sort of be the leading sort of noise and the voices. And China really, and Asia, the biggest potential victims to any supply disruption. What do you think China is willing to do, can do, to sort of mediate this, de-escalate this crisis, this war, essentially?
Well, I do not very direct involvement in the conflict from China. I mean, unlike the conflict between India and Pakistan, at that time, China was kind of further, explains its support for Pakistan. But this time it's not that clear as last time, as in May. And it's trying to de-escalate the situation by means of, peace talks, trying to create an opportunity for them to talk, between the involved parties, mainly by that side, I think.
Is Iran, Victor, trying to understand how important Iran is to China. Most or all of the oil from Iran goes to China. China has had a signed a major kind of memorandum of MOU of partnership to build, multiple $billion of sort of Belt Road Initiative infrastructure. But is this a close relationship? Is China willing to do anything to sort of save Iran from this this sort of attack from the West?
Well, I do not see it that way. I mean, yes, there's a lot of cooperation between China and Iran, but Iran has so many choices when China is not the biggest, I mean, partner with Iran, I might say so, because Iran has been kind of moving from side to side, and we do not see its determination in cooperation with China in some aspect. And so, yes, Iran is a big exporter to China. In the beginning of 2025, a lot more oil was supplied to China, but in April, the volume declined. And now we see continued drops in May because of worries about such a sanction. I mean, such a sense, there was growing concerns among independent refiners in China in April, May, yes.
Omar, just looking at that question of this sort of, is there a last minute off ramp here for international diplomacy to still sort of play a role? Where do you think the Gulf states are? The GCC issued what I would consider was a fairly robust statement for a fairly quiet organization earlier this week. Each individual, the leaders of UAE and Saudi have published on their state news agencies that they've had phone calls with the president of Iran, condemning Israel's attack and solidarity expressions towards Iran. Is there a role here for the GCC to provide an off-ramp?
Yeah, so in principle, there's a lot of parallels between what we're seeing now in the Cuban Missile Crisis, in that you've got two opposing sides dug in and seemingly railroaded into a very dangerous confrontation. In the Cuban Missile Crisis, you needed a sort of out-of-the-box solution, which was this moving the missiles from Turkey, I think it was. And I think what could happen here with the GCC is someone from Qatar, someone from Oman, two countries that are probably best situated to mediate, to come up with some kind of out-of-the-box suggestion that allows Iran to not look like it's capitulating, that allows Israel to look like it's achieved its objectives, and gives the US an excuse not to be involved. I'm not saying that's easy to do, but just as we were on the brink in the 60s in Cuba, we are very much on the brink now. And sometimes what it needs is, someone to come up with some sort of intelligent idea, because I think it's safe to say that those on the ground seem to be locked into a certain way of thinking. That's how I see it could happen. I don't think it's particularly likely, but it wouldn't, if we were at the edge of, if we go back to the Cuban Missile Crisis, at that time, I don't think anyone would have said it was particularly likely that we'd get a diplomatic off-road, yet we found one. So that's
Let me just ask on that point, in terms of what's at stake here in order to incentivize, de-escalation and intervention from these parties. For example, most of the Gulf states desalinate their water from the Gulf. They do not have rivers or lakes, etc. So the body of water that is the Gulf is our water supply. And we're talking about bombing major nuclear sites here, something that anytime it's even a reference to it in the Ukraine conflict has every European leader, jumping up and down and doing dumbbell somersaults in fear. Here we're talking about the biggest bomb in the world hitting a major nuclear facility, and then there are other nuclear facilities that are actually right on the Gulf. So right. From that point alone, does that reach a threshold of do not cross this line, the risk, the unpredictable outcome?
Yeah, I mean,
what do you think?
That's just one of the many adverse consequences that could strike the Gulf countries. In addition to that very clear one, there's also the issue that if the US gets involved and Iran as it's stated very clearly, retaliates against the US, the most obvious targets are all within the Gulf, whether you're talking about the various military bases. And then if that draws the Gulf countries in, then that obviously exposes all the sensitive infrastructure that you mentioned, the desalination plants, the electricity power plants, and so on and so forth. So there's no question in my mind that the Gulf
Well, if you have
countries
nuclear pollution in the water of the Gulf, I mean, never mind other things that one
Yeah,
has to
absolutely.
purify. This becomes, this becomes beyond see, it's serious on every level that it can be serious. But these are some of the sort of trickle down, literally trickle down, where the outcomes of these things. Once you push over
But the
that,
problem the Gulf countries face is that despite the clear, huge incentive for them to avoid the escalation and to seek a diplomatic solution, their ability to influence the actors remains quite limited. And they've obviously made the statements that you mentioned, but their leverage of the different actors is nowhere near at the level needed in order to force a diplomatic off-ramp. And that's why, in principle, Chinese or Russian involvement could be the path, but as we heard from Victor, it doesn't seem likely for the time being.
Bora, what about Europe? And what's at stake for Europe here? I mean, there's a lot of sense from the G7, I want to call it arrogance, but nonchalance, that this is a regional event and the ripples and ramifications are not great to the global consequence. Clearly, as we've been talking there with Omar, very significant regional consequences here that are already identifiable. I mean, my own kids are traumatized by this ongoing every day. The proximity. I mean, just the reverberations emotionally as well as physically. The poor people that are under these bombs, but. What about Europe? There is reports that the Iranian foreign minister may go to Geneva in the next coming days for talks with the European ministers. Is there a role there? Is there enough at stake for Europe to use as much muscle as they have?
Look, I think the Europeans, the Iranians, the Gulf, they should be using their mental muscles, their diplomatic muscles as much as they can. But
But
at
we
the
did
end
have
of
the
the day,
German leader say in the G7 summit in Canada that the Israelis are doing us a favor, more or less, was his statement.
yes,
It's
he said they
incredibly
are doing
reckless.
our dirty work. He
Yeah.
said the Israelis are doing our dirty work. And this is a shocking statement. It's a shocking statement. And again, we, as a public, is this what we signed up for when we elected these people? Where can we turn to? Um, does it reflect exactly? Did he make a blunder, or is that what he thinks? That people can think, oh, the Gulf leaders, as Omar mentioned, they called Iran to say they're shocked and unhappy. Did they call Netanyahu to say that they have Abraham Accords and they have relationships? So maybe they can make a call that way as well. But I think Netanyahu told them, if you want to preserve your interests, watch your mouth. And it seems like that's the dynamic. Looking at it from Trump's perspective, I think is the only important perspective. Um, he subsidizes the state of Israel, or the United States of America taxpayer does, and there is a division there. And those tea leaves are more interesting to examine, I think, than the European tea leaves. And clearly, Trump does see that he will be fighting a multi-front war domestically with the Democrats and half of his own coalition, and will not be able to get much done legislatively if he goes down the path of taking the Israeli action to its logical conclusion. But if he doesn't take it to its logical conclusion, why did he allow it to in the first place? So the logical conclusion, as he said, is unconditional surrender. Put your energy program under my control so that I'm sure that you're not making nuclear weapons. But basically, the whole refining of uranium has to be under American control. And I think the Iranians said no. And can you even trust them if they did say yes, right?
Well,
So
I
the
suppose the
regime
trust
change becomes
element,
the logical conclusion. And you've painted yourself into this corner.
Victor,
And
just
huge potential loss of credibility for the U.S. either way, one way or the other.
Victor, given the scale of this crisis in the center of the, you know, the biggest center of oil production in the world, much of it going to Asia, much of it going to China, should China not be buying more oil at this time? I mean, at $75, it could be cheap.
Yes, well, yeah, there can be a chance China is buying more in the near term now. And now we had the peak refinery maintenance over in the end of June. So the refinery run rates will be up in July, August. And we also see peak gasoline demand and jet fuel demand in August, in summer too. So there will be more demand for fuel in the coming 2 to 3 months. Yes, we will be buying more. We need more fuel at that time. Yes.
Is there storage capacity for more? I mean, there's reports that China already has over 1 billion barrels of oil in storage. Is there more capacity?
Well, probably not much more spare capacity, but China is also building some tanks now, and there are quite a few storage tanks under construction, and some of them are coming online within this year. Say, such as Yanchang Petroleum is to complete a storage well in the end of June, and some others are coming online later this year. So we expect the storage capacity to grow. Yeah, and there will be an opportunity for a little bit more fuel. Yeah.
Let's go to the survey question here, sort of tackling the sort of central theme of the headlines around the world this morning, and that is the continued drumbeating of Trump administration, U.S. administration looking to join Israel. What impact would U.S. strike on Iran have on oil prices? We've seen the oil prices obviously jump now. You would say the initial jump 10-12%, and then have kind of held on to that mid-70s range, kind of jumping from mid-60s over the last week, but haven't really shifted again. What impact would U.S. strike on Iran have on oil prices? Would it be a plus $5 event? Would it be a plus $10 event? Would it be a plus $30 event, or no change? Which of those do you think is it? This oil market seems to be obsessed with the actual disruption of oil supply, not more bombs dropping, because clearly there's enough of those already. Anymore doesn't seem to shift the dial. But does the U.S. joining, the U.S. becoming a proactive ally in this prosecuting this war on Iran, does it shift the U.S. oil, or to shift the oil markets into a different thinking, and so the risk profile changes? And even though there may not be specific oil infrastructure disrupted, it will spike the oil price or not. No change. Number 4. The question there, Omar, as part of the sort of next question that I didn't add to that, and one could have sort of kept that question going with a multiple of subclauses, was, you know, if the U.S. does join this, prosecuting this war, how great does that increase the likelihood that the actors in the war could look to disrupt the Straits of Hormuz, which is sort of one of the big talking points. Do you align with that as a risk, high risk, low risk factor? I mean, given there's many other avenues out, but your thoughts on that being on the possible at risk list, like we mentioned, the nuclear polluting of the Gulf, or etc. Is closure of the Strait of Hormuz, do you think, a realistic? It certainly grabs the headlines, even though it hasn't been a realistic outcome for decades.
Unfortunately, the Israeli and American rhetoric about replacing the regime in Iran has led to what would be an unpragmatic step becoming much more likely, which is closing the Straits of Hormuz. Normally, the sort of skepticism that was evident in the way you were speaking is because Iran would be one of the biggest losers from closing the Straits of Hormuz, and so it wouldn't want to do that. But at the moment, it's very clear that the US and Israel are saying to Iran, if you don't, participate in this unconditional surrender, the only way we can be sure that you will not do this again is by changing the government permanently. And this makes the current war very much existential from the perspective of the Iranian government. And so in that situation, absolutely, it is on the table that it would close the Straits of Hormuz, if only as anything that could disrupt their opponents, even if it causes, it disrupts its own interest. Because if you're at the 11th hour and you're staring down the barrel, to keep the metaphors going, then anything is worth a try. So really, it's quite unfortunate, and I don't know how well thought out this thought of resurrecting the Iranian monarchy is. But unfortunately, the strength of the rhetoric coming out of both countries means that now, whether it's mining these straits or whether it's blocking them militaristically, is very much a possibility, but hopefully one of limited probability.
And of course, the U.S. Navy, which is an armada supported by others, you would imagine could probably quickly deal with any disruption that was coming into that waterway. These are some of the ramifications. Bora, looking
they weren't
forward,
able to deal with the disruptions of Bab el-Mandeb very well. So I mean, I don't know.
That's true. It's now 2 years or whatever. That's a very good point. And very little traffic and still not returned to that waterway, even though the Houthis have done some kind of agreement with the Americans. Bora, I wanted just to take the opportunity also to sort of pull out the lens a bit. There are other things happening in the world, including the Fed meeting yesterday, which has to digest all of these developments, signaling a weakening outlook for the U.S. economy, but still with a higher trend for inflation. Where does that put the trajectory of rates, do you think?
I think that Vance has struck an appropriate balance. He has shown some resilience under a verbal barrage from
You mean Powell?
Trump.
Did you say Powell or Vance? I think you said Vance.
Sorry, I meant
Yeah.
Powell. Powell has
He may
been
be the
taking
next Fed chairman. That would be quite a
exactly,
curious
because
choice, but
actually most of the that was on my mind. Most of the verbal barrage has been coming from JD
yes,
Vance recently.
yes, yeah.
With these kind of Fox TV sound bites that Powell has been committing monetary malpractice, and these type of slogans have been coming out. And as we saw in the digest this morning, there's talk of potentially an early replacement for Powell, because they want lower interest rates. That's what Trump wants, and I think that's his plan. And potentially in the medium term, that could happen, but maybe Powell doesn't want it on his watch. And the conclusion is, there's a political push for higher inflation, monetary expansion. It's JD Vance who's sorry, it's Powell who's trying to hold it back. It's Powell who's trying to hold it back. But look, what we see also are the market reaction, and the market is seeing that rates have come down 100 basis points over the past year, but the market is tilting the yields to rise. When you go out 10 years and further, the yields are rising. It's not bringing the cost of capital wasn't coming down, and those long-term yields are actually what governments have to pay. Governments finance themselves not on the kind of overnight rate; they finance themselves on the long end of the curve, and so do most of us with our mortgages and other personal borrowings. So rates are high. That's true. But again, the elephant in the room, and we've talked about it before, is the huge debt of the major industrialized countries, and I don't see them being reconciled with high rates. Certainly, there's only so much Powell can do, and I think he's held the line here.
Victor, also same question to you in a slightly wider lens. I mean, the big topic through the first quarter of this year was very much the outlook for the Chinese economy, its ability to recover, and now with the tariffs and trade war with the US. What is the outlook for the Chinese economy? They were seeing continued reports that the real estate construction continues to be a very downward pressure on growth. Your thoughts on the macro outlook for China in the second half of the year, if one could put aside this immediate war in the Middle East being an unpredictable outlier impact, but taking everything else, the outlook for China's growth in the second half?
Yes. Well, actually, the U.S. industry has been putting downward pressure on the country's economy for the past 3 years or so. And when we look at the tariff, I mean, say the trade between China and the United States is just about 1/3 to a quarter of the impact from the U.S. industry. So for this year, the trade war will just make it a bit more difficult, but not such a great challenge that we cannot overcome. And for the first 5 months, we saw the official data on trade, and it was still growing. But for the second half of the year, if we had higher energy prices, yes, it will be a bigger challenge, that's for sure. So, and in the last few months, the country, if it's under much more pressures to achieve the economic growth, it might have to boost export to some products, such as the exports of oil products. Yeah. And there might be need for more stimulus too in the past few months. Yeah.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. The result of our survey is more people choosing $30 than the other options. No change is getting no votes here. It has to be said, what's up on the screen now, there's a great interview coming up with Dr. Anas Al-Hajji, of course, one of the world's leading energy markets analysts, and with some very useful insights as to the current state of play and the outlook for the second half of the year. So join that. I would just conclude by noting that we're well below the highs that we saw in Brent crude oil in the first quarter. We're even just about above where oil was before the start of the second quarter with the trade tariff announcements, the Liberation Day tariffs as they were called. And so we're just back above that level where it was before April 2nd announcement. So still no drama Obama in the oil markets. Could this be the next few days and all of the backdrop noise we're hearing, could that be shifted? Our survey seems to indicate it could be shifted dramatically. We'll post that question on social media and see if others agree with that vote from this room. All the best, everybody. Thank you so much, as always, Victor, joining us from China, Bora Bariman, of course, in London, and Omar Obeidly in Bahrain. Great to have your voice at this particular week. Thank you, guys. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.